I'm Ashton Addison from BlockWest Capital for Investment Pitch Media and the Crypto Coin Show. And today on Blockchain Interviews, we have Rowland Graus, the product manager at Agoric. Rowland, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for taking the time to come on.
Thanks for having me, Ashton.
You're very welcome. I'm excited to dive into the blockchain solutions of Agoric. This is a very special time in the cryptocurrency industry right now, and I think that the way that your team is setting up Agoric for open development, bringing in people from the outside world into the cryptocurrency world to develop decentralized applications and sort of grow this ecosystem out, I think is the perfect time for that. And I would love for you to start kicking us off by getting a little bit of background information on what is the Agoric protocol and what are some of the solutions that you're bringing to the space.
Sure. And so I'll start relatively high level. I know we're going to dig into it a little bit deeper further on in the conversation, but Agoric is a layer one chain launching this year in the Cosmos ecosystem. And one of our primary differentiators is we're a smart contracting chain that allows developers to build smart contracts in JavaScript. And as a result of being in the Cosmos ecosystem, we launch connected to IBC, which means that DeFi and NFT applications that are launched on the Agoric chain have access to capital across the Cosmos ecosystem to any other IBC connected chain. So the Cosmos Hub or the Osmosis DEX, or you name it. As a developer building on our system, you'll have access to those assets, and users on in those communities can come use the protocols you build. And so there's sort of a lot more to our smart contracting framework and what we bring to the table, but I'll leave that for later in the conversation.
Definitely. And I think that's a great start. You know, I have spoken to the IBC, Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol team at Cosmos, and I think that's going to be a huge step in just having communication between blockchains and having DeFi as a holistic ecosystem that's not isolated silos, and allow us to be able to swap assets between, you know, any protocol really easily. So I see that as a major advantage. I'd love to know like a little bit more specifically about, you know, how Agoric is going to fit into that ecosystem and where it's going to provide value to the other protocols and the solutions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the vision of Cosmos generally, and I'm not part of the Cosmos team, but I'll speak for them, is that in most cases, Cosmos blockchains are application specific. So if you look at Akash, for example, they have a very specific use case they're solving, which is they want people to be able to run compute off of other external services on a chain. And Osmosis DEX is sort of a, you know, you can think of it as sort of like a balancer, and that's all it does. What Agoric does sort of somewhat uniquely in the Cosmos ecosystem is because we're a smart contracting platform, we allow a whole range of flexibility of things that people can build. And so, for example, if you're an Osmosis DEX user, you have an LP token and you can do certain things on Osmosis with that LP token. But if you wanted to stake it and hold it for an entire year and change the amount of rewards based on that, that's something that Osmosis has trouble building quickly. They probably could do it, and the team there is great. But it would be much faster to build that on Agoric. And so you can sort of think about, at least to start with, the way we start augmenting these other chains is building the kind of functionality that they would like to have, but can't easily launch because they're application specific. I'll give another example. We were actually just speaking with the DevRel from Akash today. And one thing that they'd like to be able to do is if a user's lease terminates, they want to be able to have an on-chain contract that immediately starts a new one. And that's something that, again, you know, in a generalized smart contracting platform is very easy to do, but because they are application specific, it's harder for them to do themselves. And so that's, I think, how we start adding value to IBC connected chains in the Cosmos ecosystem. Obviously, we have, you know, our own aspirations around what gets built and becomes sort of core in Agoric itself. But just right as we roll out, these are where there are going to be tons of opportunities for developers to come in and add value quickly.
Totally. And I would love to just dive a little bit deeper on that development ecosystem. You know, there's so many developers that know traditional programming languages and software as a service, and not as many in blockchain yet. You know, and primarily with the network effect of Ethereum, there are Solidity developers, but they have to learn a new programming language. With Agoric, it makes it a lot easier. You know, how are you planning to bring a lot of development to Agoric early on?
Yeah, another great question, and something we talk about a lot internally. I think you can break it down into two possible pathways, right? There's one pathway where we take JavaScript developers that don't know much about DeFi blockchain and teach them DeFi and blockchain. The other pathway is we find DeFi crypto native developers and have them come build in JavaScript. And frankly, we're going down both pathways at once. And from a marketing and capture standpoint, our language needs to be very different for those two groups. I think personally, I believe that the initial group likely ends up being crypto Web3 aware developers who, for whatever reason, have not been able to take the time to learn Solidity or don't believe in Solidity as the right way to go. And I think there are a lot of those just in casual conversations that I've had in Discords of various core DeFi projects. There's a lot of those people that are developers but aren't currently building in Web3, can't take 6 months off to learn Solidity. And so I think realistically, that's probably where early demand comes from. But that said, we've also, and I know we'll likely get into this later, but we've started putting out developer bounties for specific pieces of functionality that people can come to us and build for a little bit of cash on Gitcoin. And I've actually found that most of our applicants have been primarily JavaScript developers. And so they're sort of aware of Web3. They've sort of built in the crypto space before potentially, but they're mostly just generalized contractors, but they can build in JavaScript and they have a team that can build in JavaScript. And that's where we're seeing a lot of demand naturally anyway. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see where we get the most traction early on. I think we believe very strongly that in the medium term, it will absolutely be the JavaScript fintech developer group that starts becoming the core engine here, because it's just so much bigger, orders of magnitude bigger than people that know how to build in Solidity right now.
Totally. I completely agree, Roland. And I also agree with the fact that you may need to add incentivizations in there because there are just so many platforms to be working on. How does a developer choose Agoric over any of the numerous protocols, right? And having that bounty is obviously going to help. Perhaps hackathons or other grants as well, I think will definitely help. And I know we're early on, and I want to sort of get a snapshot just to bring perspective for everybody of where Agoric's at right now, because there's, it's very early on. And so maybe you could touch on just where you're at right now and what are sort of the next steps.
Yeah, so we have a lot of stuff going at once here. And I guess to back up a little bit, Agoric, and this is my personal view from observing the team. I joined roughly a year ago in October of 2020, and Agoric is sort of the culmination of decades of work by the founding team and a number of the core engineers here. The group worked on the first production smart contract and wrote some of those sort of early seminal papers on smart contracting and computers interacting with financial incentives back in the late 80s. And so a lot of the thinking from the team has sort of bubbled up into what we are building right now. And this company, Agoric, was only founded in 2018, but it was built off of sort of decades of thinking and work by a bunch of this group. And a lot has happened since 2018. So the team has grown, and we released our alpha roughly a year ago, which was sort of the first view of the Agoric VM and first smart contracts that were built on top, and a place where developers could come play. And then the beta came roughly 4 months later. I'm going to say it was early spring of this year where we released our beta, which included a version of some of our core actual DeFi protocols, which I haven't gone into this yet, is sort of a core part of the Agoric stack. And actually, we have sort of a vault and AMM that become a critical part of our own infrastructure. So we launched the first version of those as part of the beta. And then through the summer, we ran a multi-phase long incentivized testnet, which brought in validators from all over the globe and tested a bunch of different layers of the stack. So to think about the Agoric stack, we sort of have Tendermint and Cosmos at the bottom layer. And then we have our own virtual machine, which we're right now calling Swingset. And then on top of that, we have our Zoe and ERTP smart contracting framework layer. So that's that's the layer where, as a developer building a smart contract, you'll actually be interacting with directly, where it sort of shows you how to create fungible and non-fungible assets, how to provide offers to users so that exchanges are guaranteed by the underlying framework. And then above that is the actual smart contracts in the protocol. So all of that is getting built sort of simultaneously here. And the incentivized testnet was a way to test each of those layers and then also test how they interact. So an example would be, we had a staking dynamics phase where our validators came in and they were staking in the sort of Cosmos proof of stake way, where you have a token and you're earning staking rewards, but then they were able to bring that token that they earned as a staking rewards up into the JavaScript layer, trade it on our AMM to buy more tokens to be able to sort of increase their stake faster. And we saw some validators sort of take that to the extreme and actually try to take over the testnet, just, you know, not for any reward or just to take things down just because they wanted to. But just to see sort of how those DeFi layers and the core Cosmos layers interacted. And so that was sort of a lot of the focus of the testnet. And just to wrap this up, the last stress test phase ended roughly a month ago. And now we are sort of full steam ahead on getting our mainnet rollout phasing starting sort of nowish.
Very cool and great background. Thank you for that. That brings a lot of context. It's great to see, you know, that there's so much being worked on all at the same time. And
Yep.
And, you know, we talked about the development ecosystem. You talked about Cosmos and Tendermint, and you mentioned the proof of stake that they're on. I'm curious if there's any other information you can provide about when applications are built and they're actually going to be running on Agoric. You know, is it fast? Is it validating through Cosmos, or it's its own proof of stake? And what's the, you know, is it fast and cheap, or how does that work?
Yeah. So the way to think about transaction throughput for any chain is that it's sort of the fundamental level. It's limited by its consensus mechanism, and you know, that's sort of how the different nodes interact, talk to each other. They're distributed geographically, and they have to come to some agreement about what happened in a specific block. And Agoric is using Tendermint right now. So if you want to sort of get a sense of what our throughput will look like, you can look at things like the Cosmos Hub or Osmosis or any other Cosmos chain. There will be some differences based on the compute that actually has to happen in our blocks. So things go up in JavaScript, get computed there. So our blocks may be a little longer than an average Cosmos block, but it's sort of on the order of less than 10 seconds per block. And then there's sort of how much compute can happen, and it becomes a very technical, challenging topic. That said, that the consensus layer is really what drives the throughput. And from our side, the Agoric VM is actually technically consensus agnostic. So if it turns out that several years down the line, there is a better, more performant consensus mechanism, you know, maybe the Avalanche consensus ends up really proving out what it's been doing, we could theoretically switch there. And clearly, you know, that would be a bunch of work on our side, and this is sort of not something we could snap our fingers and do. But because we're building something for the long term, it is sort of upgradable as the world sort of evolves its consensus mechanisms. So that was sort of a long answer to a simple question. I guess what I would say is take a look at Osmosis or the Cosmos Hub and get a sense of how Cosmos interactions and transactions happen. You'll find they are quite fast, and they have fast finality, which is a nice property and sort of important for a lot of the DeFi use cases that we're looking to enable.
Definitely. No, that makes sense. And I'm glad that you mentioned there, you know, as it continues to grow out, you can sort of adapt, and it's not like you're stuck with what you have, and, you know, you have a Bitcoin blockchain that's backed up from whatever 10 years ago they decided. You know, you can sort of adapt with the times as the platform scales.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's great. And you mentioned that the mainnet is being worked on right now. I'm curious if you could touch on if there's an Agoric network token that's used. You know, is that just for gas fees for the transaction and governance, or are there other functionalities that are coming out? And maybe you could talk about that.
Sure. So we actually have two native tokens for the Agoric chain. One, the staking token is called BLD. And that is what's used to secure the chain in sort of the proof of stake, delegated proof of stake Cosmos Tendermint way. where you may stake to a validator of your choice, and the validator earns staking rewards, and you earn part of that as well as part of your risk in securing the system. But it also secures the economy itself, which is a complicated thing to explain in only a couple minutes. But Agoric, I mentioned earlier that there are two protocol level DeFi apps that sort of become core and native to our system. And if you squint, they sort of look like MakerDAO and Uniswap. Obviously, there's sort of competitive differences, but just to give people something to have a frame of reference on. And the Maker style vault system allows other people to bring in collateral and mint our local currency, which we call RUN, which is meant to be roughly stable to $1, against their collateral. And that RUN currency is actually what's used to pay for transactions in the system. And sort of there's an important reason for that, which is, if you talk to real businesses that want to do business on the blockchain, one of the challenges they have is it turns out that paying an operational expense in a fluctuating currency is a huge pain for them, right? You have to track taxes on all that. And it would be nice for them to be able to have sort of a stable currency that they use to pay for transactions. So we wanted to make sure that was a core part of it. We also expect that RUN ends up being the primary pricing mechanism in system. So everything that Agoric builds and launches is going to be priced in RUN, and we'll sort of have RUN as the common denominator pricing. And all RUN has to be minted via a collateralized backing, sort of similar to MakerDAO. So that interest, or interest is the wrong word, call it a stability fee on RUN, ends up coming back to stakers. So as part of their work to stake and secure the system from an actual proof of stake security way, they also secure the system in an economic way, and Build ends up backing the vault system if it ever becomes under collateralized. So in a disaster scenario, the worst case thing is that the system actually mints additional Build and then covers its debt that way. So those are the two native tokens as part of the protocol, and hopefully that gives an overview of how they operate.
Definitely. No, that helps a lot. I didn't expect it to be that intricate. So I'm impressed. I'm impressed. And you mentioned, looking forward, I guess the next big thing for Agoric is working towards the mainnet, and that's going to be happening in the coming months.
Yeah, that's right. And so we have a phased mainnet rollout schedule. And so the first phase, which we're actually calling phase 0, is actually happening likely in the next week or two. At this point, it's only blocked on operational stuff, not technical stuff. And that is the launch of our Cosmos chain only. So that will basically be a proof of stake chain that has staking and governance, and none of the JavaScript virtual machine stuff that I've been talking about. So we're calling it phase 0 because it really doesn't include our tech. It's largely Cosmos, but it's to make sure that validators are up and running, that we have all these systems working well. And then mainnet phase 1, which will need to be voted in by token holders through the proof of stake voting system, that's part of phase 0. That is the launch of the Agoric VM. It will include our treasury, which is our vault system, and the automated market maker that I was just talking about. And that will be sort of the first view of really the Agoric system. And that will be Q4 of this year is the current plan. Beyond that, we have, I'll skip to phase 3, which is sort of full permissionless rollout of our system. So any developer can build and launch an application. And the delta in time between phase 1 and phase 3 is really about security audits. So how can we be sure that the system is secure against malicious code prior to allowing potentially malicious code onto the system? And so in the intervening time, we have this sort of phase 2, which is permissioned code allowed on the system. And that will have to go through some governance process, go through some review process. That still is TBD, but we want to make sure that there is sort of a pathway in this intervening time for developers to actually get products launched on Agoric, even if it's not permissionless still. So I think right now the plan is that Q1 of next year gets us to permissionless mainnet, but given the nature of security audits, that date could easily slip.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for all that information. That brings a lot of context moving forward, and I'm super excited to see all of that play out because it does sound like a solution that's needed in the space right now, and I'm looking forward to your team delivering that. So for the viewers that are looking to follow along with all these updates, get involved in the community right away as well, what's the best way for people to learn more about Agoric?
Yeah, and yeah, just to sum up, I think really our goal is to make sure it is as easy as possible for mainstream developers to build and deploy secure DeFi and NFT applications quickly. And so if that's something that sounds interesting to you, follow us on Twitter, join us on Discord, that's where we primarily do most of our interaction. You can find me there. I'm in the team section, and feel free to DM me or DM any of our team to ask questions. And also just start submitting to our GitHub as well. So any of those work. Yeah.
Well, I will leave those links as well in the description box below. Thank you so much for taking the time, Roland, to come on. Pleasure speaking to you about Agoric. All the best moving forward, and let's follow up in the near future.
Thanks so much, Ashton.